From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's Just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Justice through genomics.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, a secret hiding place you don't want to keep secret anymore, that long-forgotten address, how many of your favorite songs have been ruined from being used to sell washing machines and discount shopping sites? Anything. Tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host. She's either just had hand surgery or she's finally decided to flip everybody off, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. That was not the direction I thought you were going to go with the intro, but I am grateful that you did, because it is one of my fervent prayers that most of my favorite musicians will not sell out. It's too late. I know my prayers have not been heard, but it was quite amusing as we were sitting at the Breakfast Nook table one evening having dinner. Even though it's called the Breakfast Nook, we pretty much eat all of our meals there.
Right.
And because who wants to go to the formal dining room?
Not us.
No,
not us.
we're
No
not
way.
formal people. We barely wear clothing anymore. We're basically cave people.
Love the pandemic, ladies
Yeah.
and gentlemen.
Who gives a shit about whatever? So, the LG washer. It's a very creative use of the Old Dirty Bastard song. You know, I got your money, because they're like, hey, dirty, baby, I got your money. Except it's, hey, dirty, baby, I got your laundry.
Yeah.
So we're sitting there watching that, and I was like, oh, no. And producer Mark goes, is that Dirty Old Man? And I'm like, well, Grandpa, it's Old Dirty Bastard. But, similar. It's the same thing. It's just syntax.
I'm just not into your classic, rap or whatever.
Hip-hop.
Hip-hop.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. And then the other one that I thought producer Mark might swallow his tongue was Rakuten, where there's a beautiful woman with a afro playing a huge baby grand piano on a big lit stage, and she's like, Rakuten, la 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 la, whatever,
Yeah.
the rest of Rocket Man.
Right.
And producer Mark was like, it was like choking on his tongue. And
Yeah. Rakuten,
Yeah,
selling stuff on TV just to make a buck.
and actually that's the first thing you said was Bernie Taupin's getting a check.
Yeah, Bernie Taupin's giving a check, even though they're not even using any of his lyrics.
And I turned to producer Mark and said, well, what about Elton? And you said, oh, he's getting one too.
Oh, well,
and I was
yeah.
like, okay.
He should get all of it, because it's just totally his music.
Oh, okay. So yeah, it's LG, creative use of a song from my generation, and Rakuten, sad beating a dead horse, a song from producer Mark's generation. So,
Yeah. That's it's just so much fun. So you don't want to talk about your surgery then, eh?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about it.
So a very common thing, apparently called trigger finger, even though I do not have a gun. And it's my middle finger, my left hand. And those of you who know me from social media or know me at all know that it's an important finger in my life. Typically, it's the right one I use, but I do a whole lot of flipping off of everything, of people, my husband, the dog, the television, just inanimate
Guy that
objects.
cuts you off in traffic.
Well, I hold that down lower so you can't see it because I don't want to be shot. But yeah, inanimate objects, I just do a whole lot of flipping off. It's just a very, it's a succinct, simple way to get my point across. And for a couple of years now, I've been having injections like once a year of cortisone, which the first one was great, lasted about 13 months. And I didn't know this except they read my record back to me. Second one, pretty good, lasted about 12 months. Third one didn't really work. And about 4 weeks later, I'm like, this is bullshit. I can't straighten my finger. But by then I had apparently done some damage to a tendon in my palm. So I thought I fought the law and the law won, except he's a doctor.
Yeah,
I
you
fought the surgeon.
Doc and the doc won. Yeah.
I fought the surgeon. I was like, I'm not having surgery. This is bullshit. You don't do surgery for something little like your hand. No, you save that for like open hearts and shit. I know you're a surgeon and your love of life is to fucking cut into people, but you're not doing it to me, buddy. No siree, no surgery. Cut to about 4 weeks later, I'm like, I cannot stand the pain. The pain was excruciating. It just was terrible. Not to mention the, abject loss of use of my hand. So I do not recommend surgery during a pandemic. I would absolutely not recommend that. However, it is what it is. And I also had no idea the pandemic would be going on 9 months later.
Right.
I thought about a month we'd be out of this. We're all good. No. So
I could not go in to be with her. I could not. I had to stay outside driving around the neighborhood in my car aimlessly for about 4 hours.
Yeah, because my surgery was 2 hours delayed, and but the litany of tests I had to have before was overwhelming. I guess we can, apparently, according to the surgeon, we can blame the pandemic. I had to have an EKG, a chest x-ray, full blood and urine panel. Even though I'd had one at the end of October, it was going to be 35 days after those last lab tests, and they will only perform surgery 30 days after the test. So I had to have it all done over again. And then, of course, my beloved COVID test, which I had never had one, but thought, okay, it's time. And we did a drive-through. Producer Mark, of course, could not go with me for any of these tests. You have to go alone. The COVID test was a lot more difficult than I thought. Everyone was like, oh, it's 3 seconds. And people have videotaped themselves having it done and drive-through. And I don't know if I just had a small woman who enjoyed this, but I also have a deviated septum, which apparently makes it a little more difficult. I did explain that. Yeah. I did explain that. And she's like, which side? And I'm like, I don't know. I forgot. So I think it's on the right side, but she picked the left nostril, and it was a lot more than 3 seconds. I kept, opening my eyes, and she's like, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And I was like, fucking damn. I mean, they told me my eyes would water, and, I'm like, okay. And she finally got done. And as I drove away, I started crying, and my eyes did water, but I started crying because it's just very invasive. I mean, there's nothing, you can't describe it. People, try and explain it. It's like, oh, it's nothing. It's like a Q-tip in your nose. No, it's not. I actually had someone tell me, oh, it's nothing. They put a Q-tip in the back of your throat. No, they don't. They go through your nose up to your brain, and it's really unpleasant. And I cried. And I also had a splitting headache for half the day after that, about 4 hours. I had a splitting headache. So yeah, everyone has a different experience, and I'm not trying to scare you. If you feel like you need to get one, get one. Some people just come through with flying colors, and some people get something in the back of their throat. I don't understand that. One would think you could get a blood test and be able to tell if it's in your system, but I guess not. So here I am. All tested up, by the way. I am negative. Thank you very much. I also don't have COVID. I'm extremely negative in body, mind, and spirit, but I'm also negative for COVID. So there's that. And then producer Mark drove me on Thursday morning to have my surgery, and I was like, can I just have a local? And they're like, no. And I was like, why not? It's just my hand. And they're like, no. Even people who don't want anesthesia beg for anesthesia. And I'm like, what is happening? So because propofol is a light drug, which, hey, I've had that twice for a colonoscopy and an endoscopy in your throat. And I don't remember a damn thing. But because you, I guess, wake up quicker or something, I had 3 different anesthesias. And I had an anesthesiologist who was a bit of a toad. Really not pleasant woman, but 3 anesthesias, and I was out, and I woke up, and I was like, oh, fuck, my hand's all wrapped up, and it is pretty swollen. And producer Mark picked me up. Probably the only positive part of this whole thing was a very large, kind of Samoan-looking guy, young man, in a long white lab coat, took my temperature in the lobby of the surgical center. And it's early-ish in the morning, I don't know, 8:30 or something. And he took my temperature, the infrared thermometer, and said, 96.3, wow, you're cold. And I said, you have no idea. And he started giggling. And he goes, I mean, it's just the coldest temperature I've registered this morning. And I go, oh, it's deep. It starts in my soul. And he started laughing really hard. And he goes, you have a good day, miss. And I said, thank you for not calling me ma'am. And he said, oh, you're definitely a miss. And I'm like, okay, thank you. So it was kind of funny.
Yes.
So, yeah, so he didn't think I was an old lady, even though he was a handsome young linebacker, taking my temp of 96.3, pretty much close to death, I'm thinking. I did look up, 95 is when hypothermia starts. So,
is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
So I was just a point and a third away from hypothermia or something. I'm like, okay, no, I'm fine. I like it cold. And I wish I were cold all the time, but I am not. Alas, I am not. But the surgery happened, blah-de-blah. I woke up in recovery. I was fine. Producer Mark came and got me and brought me a drink and a fillet of fish from McDonald's. All I wanted was a drink because, you can't eat or drink after midnight. And as we were driving, I could feel, he was taking me home. I could feel my fingers swelling. And I looked down and you could basically see them swelling in front of me. And I'm a mess. I mean, I'm orange stained with betadine. And my fingers are swollen so bad I can't get my wedding ring on, which hurts my heart a little bit, but I know it'll go back on at some point because it was actually loose. I was going to have it adjusted, but now I don't even think I could get it on my swollen, gross fingers. But they're orange and swollen, and they're swollen so bad the skin is shiny. So it looks like I have baby carrots sticking out of my bandage for my fingers.
They don't look that bad.
It looks worse than that.
Don't.
They look terrible, which is terrible if you were extending it out. They look really bad, but it'll get better. And I am in much less pain today. We're at day 2. Still can't move that finger, but I have to do little exercises for the other fingers to keep mobility. So, and then, the stitch is out in a week and a half, and blah-de-blah, whatever.
Hopefully no more trigger finger.
Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen again because I'm not down for this at all. This is a much bigger deal than I thought. I thought it was going to be like little small, cut, snip, get the fuck out, whatever. No, it's a little bit bigger than that. But producer Mark has been wonderful, and I am very grateful that I have someone with me because they won't let you leave unless someone's going to be with you for 24 hours after. I guess they're afraid the anesthesia will kick back in and you'll be found on the floor or something. I don't know, but yeah, if you have to have something like this, which I know several tipsters have, because I got messages on Facebook from a couple tipsters who said, oh, I had that done a couple years ago and it's no joke. And I'm like, oh, okay. I never thought it was a joke, but I did think it was a little bit less than this bullshit. But just keep a good thought that, all this shit just heals and I'm back to flipping you off with my left hand sooner rather than later.
Intentionally instead of unintentionally.
Right. Yeah, it's almost unintentional, not because I can't bend the finger at all. Right. So I'm just flipping everyone off in a kind of a half-assed kind of way. It's very sad. I feel like it needs to be full finger salute as opposed to like that halfy shit.
And ladies and gentlemen, she is still here reporting for duty.
I am.
At the Tip-Sters headquarters here in the middle of the Homestead Studio.
At HQ.
Yeah. Homestead Studio HQ.
JTT HQ. Yeah, here we are. So I had wanted to do something on this for a while, and it feels like it's a good time. And part of that is inspired by our friend Dr. David Middleman from Othram Labs, Othram Inc. And he, I will be mentioning a case that they were integral in helping solve at the end of this episode. But I found over the last couple of weeks doing research on this, I had found a couple of things I thought were interesting and funny, but I wanted to list some of the places I found information on DNA, familial DNA, what I said in the intro, which is justice through genomics, which is actually the motto of Othram. And they're just doing amazing things, which we will talk about. But some of the places I found information were NBC News, which we'll talk about in this episode, The Atlantic, Wired.com, Forensic Science Simplified, Nature.com, National Geographic, Genetics Digest, and what sort of comprises the beginning of this is justice.gov. They have a lot of information about genetics on justice.gov, which is interesting. But the thing that propelled me to want to do this sooner rather than later was a comment on one of my murdery web pages, and it's someone whose name is Babel Bloop, and I don't know if they're male.
That's not their name.
It is. I don't know if they're male or female. It's not their name, right? I don't think their mom gave them that name. But they simplified everything for me, and it just made me laugh so hard. And it's smart, but concise. And their comment is, DNA is made up of sugar and acids. Technically, all living things are complicated forms of candy. So I thought that was...
That's really a good analogy.
It's smart and a great analogy. I'm going to hope that most living things are not complicated forms of candy corn. I'm going to hope that...
candy corn never is far away from this podcast.
It never leaves my brain, mostly for the horror of it. But I'm going to hope that most living things are like, I don't know, almond M&Ms or junior mints. I want to be a junior mint.
Yeah.
I could also be a peppermint patty. I don't know what they're called. Just peppermint patty. Not the girl from Peanuts, but the refreshing peppermint patty in the silver
those are
packaging.
even better than junior mints.
It's tough for me because it's the mixture of dark chocolate and the cream of minty tartar or whatever the fuck is in the middle of the squishy.
Oh. And it's so refreshing.
It is good. They're good. So that's what if I had to be a complicated form of candy with my DNA, that's what I'd want to be. So justice.gov, not calling human beings, all living things, candy, says that all cellular organisms have the double-stranded DNA genomes. So I am not real sciencey. I'm barely, functional. So the only thing I really know about DNA is that, I can't remember what grade it was when we start learning about it, but it's deoxyribonucleic acid. That's all I knew that DNA stood for.
Wow. You can pronounce all that? I'm very impressed. I read it and I go cross-eyed.
That's the goofiest thing you've ever said. It's the only thing I know. So just to let you know, I am terrible at math and science, and I'm not like that Barbie that they got Mattel to ban that was like, math is hard. I'm not that bad. But I did pad my GPA in college with English and literature because in writing classes, it's the only thing I'm good at. But I skated through geology, which I actually did enjoy. I really enjoyed. We would go on field trips to outcroppings of rocks, and even in northern Kentucky, there are some fascinating, pieces of rock and historic, prehistoric rock, and it's fascinating. But I would not have gotten through geology if it were not for my lab partner, Daryl Langford. So I wanted to say thank you to him because he drugged me through geology kicking and screaming. So I really did enjoy that. But that's pretty much it. Biology, I'm like just a flaming flame out. Just not good at sciencey type stuff. But molecular biologists believe that life originated with the appearance of the first DNA molecule. And obviously, they believe it was part of the RNA strand that DNA took root and became replicated. But times change, and After many decades of experimental work, they decided that DNA synthesis and replication actually requires kind of a plethora of proteins. So we're, made up of sugar, acid, and, proteins really, but we're still all complicated candy.
Oh, so there is still a little meat in there.
If you call proteins, those kind of proteins, meat, sure.
Throw a little ham and eggs in there with my good and plenty.
Oh, no. This has just gone way off the rails. So I know most of you tipsters know this, but I always love a refresher about how DNA really became useful in solving crimes. And it really wasn't until the 80s, and we can thank our friends across the pond in the UK, because Dr. Alec Jeffreys actually made genetic fingerprinting available. And it's odd the way DNA became useful in crime literally from fingerprints. He got DNA from fingerprints in a case in 1986. So he was investigating this case of 2 rapes and murders that happened in 1983 and then 1986. And in 1986, Dr. Jeffreys uses this genetic fingerprinting that, these crimes were in this small town, Leicestershire in the UK.
Leicestershire.
Oh, sorry. Leicestershire. Like Worcestershire, except Leicestershire.
Exactly.
And these fingerprints were collected, but he's the one who connected them to semen stains that were collected from the rapes and murders. So in 1987, that evidence was first used in the United States. They used Dr. Jeffreys' formula of using fingerprints as well as semen together. And that was the first case in the United States that was used to convict a man from Florida, Tommy Lee Andrews. And he was sentenced to 22 years in prison for rape. And that is one of those things that brings me hope, because this episode is going to be about how we use DNA and the way people are hopeful in the use of it and the way people are frightened in how it's used. But it does bring me hope because, there's a backlog of kits, of DNA kits that need to be examined and cases that need to be solved. And I feel like, as far as use in murder and rape, I feel like there should not be a statute of limitations for rape. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. You may not think of it as big of a crime as murder, but you are murdering a part of a rape victim's soul. You change their life forever, the same way murder does. I mean, you can say that a purse snatching or a mugging changes a person's life forever, and it probably does. Puts them in a place of being fearful and checking things and not being able to trust, the same way a rape victim feels. And I just don't feel like there should be a statute of limitations on rape. So having this backlog of DNA that's collected from rape victims, not only do I feel like that should be paramount in being tested and helping solve cases, it should not ever have a statute of limitations like murder. Just my opinion. Just my opinion.
It's not just your opinion, darling.
Well, I appreciate that, Producer Mark. That means a lot, actually. Coming from you, that means a lot. I feel like a lot of men don't understand. Obviously, men can absolutely be rape victims also. But I feel like a lot of men don't understand what happens to a rape victim. And it really does kill a part of their soul. And that's just like a murder to me. So Dr. Jeffreys made this platform available for people to perform identity tests. So it was like a good way to find out about paternity or, familial DNA, like how to find out if you're, adopted or family, or it's pretty interesting. And to me, it's odd that the FBI didn't start using DNA testing till 1998. but it's still interesting. It was used in crimes in the U.S., as we know, in 1987. So it took, 11 years for the FBI to kind of get on board and get, their database CODIS started. So CODIS is immensely helpful, but I discussed this with Dr. Middleman when he was a guest. It's problematic to me because of the small number of people that are in it. It's people that have committed crimes. If you get habitually caught and they end up taking your DNA for a violent crime, that's great. And they have something to compare it against, phenomenal. If you have skated by, as so many criminals have, if you have not been caught, if you have, gotten away with it for a long time, they got nothing. If you are a reoffender, they've got nothing to compare it to. It's, there's only 5% of the U.S. population that are available, their DNA is available in CODIS. And I believe it was Dr. Middleman that told us they only test 20 or 23 maybe markers, and Othram Labs, which is doing amazing work, which we explained and we'll explain later, uses 100,000 markers.
That still flabbergasts me.
That's
is amazing.
So we know that there's genealogy websites like 23andMe and Ancestry, and they, had no idea what was going to happen when they started building these DNA databases. These were for genealogy buffs and, people, heredity nerds who wanted to find out about a close relative or track their health history, or did I really come from this country or this part of the world? They had no idea what they were doing when they started these websites. And it has opened up the world, for crime solving, and has opened up another can of worms for people who feel that their personal information is being accessed by maybe people they don't want to know their information. But it's, there's been thousands of cases that have been solved because of this. And on the flip side, there have been innocent people who've been freed from prison because of the use of DNA provided by family members. It doesn't matter, in my mind right now, the reason for DNA testing. So a sample is collected, let's just say it's blood, and then the testing begins. So they need to, compare it to a sample that's either left at a crime scene, or if there's something left at a crime scene that they can match it up, and then the DNA testing begins. So if you ask somebody who works in, the law enforcement world, criminal justice, they're not going to be able to do their jobs without DNA. Now, we know that, I believe, and a lot of other people do too, that a lot of crime is still solved with shoe leather. It just is. But part of that shoe leather might be finding something with a sample on it. And then you go to work in that area, and then you combine it with the shoe leather, because the DNA on its own isn't enough to solve a case. You can say the DNA doesn't lie. And one of the things that Dr. Middleman says that I love is that if you've left DNA at a crime scene, you're already caught. Now, I love the way he thinks, but as we know, there's a lot of backlog of cases that need to be solved and need to be looked at. But what we want to talk about are the cases that have been solved, the cases that have blossomed under these DNA tests that would not have been for many other reasons. And these things have resulted in not only arrests, but convictions. It's one thing to get a suspect arrested. It's another thing to convict them. And the thing that most people want now is to know that there's DNA, and it isn't always available. But that's where another thing that Dr. Middleman says is the collaboration. It's all about collaboration. He understands that Othram Labs provides a great service. He also understands it takes law enforcement to be open to using his lab or labs like his, and to do the other footwork. They can do the work in the lab, the science work, but law enforcement has to do the footwork. And thank God most of them do. And, God bless the ones that really do it right. So the FBI has the DNA records of 5 million convicted offenders. And it isn't just murderers, thank goodness. It's also sex offenders, which I think is very important. So everyone who's registered as a sex offender, and this is in every one of the 50 states of the United States, is required to submit a DNA sample. I love that and didn't know that. I did not know that if you are a sex offender and you're, on a website, that's great. But the fact that you are required to submit DNA to law enforcement, I don't know, it makes me sleep a little better at night. So this is from NBC News in October of 2019. And they're discussing how GEDmatch can be controversial. It started as this free website for people to share their DNA in hopes to find relatives, people that, like I said, maybe were adopted, people that, didn't know relatives, or, families moved and they wanted information. So, police agencies figured out how to go in the back door, and they would come up with a name, Bob Davis, and put that in as, somebody looking for someone, and try and compare it to others. And Bob Davis turns out to be Joseph James D'Angelo. And they, use a fake name and a fake profile to find, people who are related to a serial offender or an offender of any kind. Now, GEDmatch is pretty small. They only had at the time a little over 1 million users. And after the Golden State Killer was arrested, they went down from 1 million profiles that were available to law enforcement to 0 because of privacy issues. And they altered their terms of service, so they excluded all members of their database to be looked at from law enforcement searches. Now, what you have to do is opt in. And what Curtis Rogers, the head of GEDmatch, did was he encouraged people. In an email, I was one of those people, because producer Mark got me a 23andMe ancestry kit for Christmas a few years ago. I guess it was 2018. It was the year that Joseph James D'Angelo was arrested. It was the first year of the podcast. And I will, as a sidebar, I was horribly disappointed in my complete and utter whiteness. I mean, not that it's bad to be white, but I wanted something more than, what am I, 94% Northern European, 87% Welsh or something.
Yeah, but there was still a little bit there.
Yeah, 0.07% trace. So I'm holding on to the trace.
I think we all have a little
Visigoth.
trace.
We all have a little. Now that is something that you have said ever since I knew you. You were like, oh yeah, I'm a gypsy. I'm a mix of. So Mark, it's been very widely thought that Mark is like half Sicilian, half Welsh. His father's last name is Humphreys, spelled the Welsh spelling, not the British spelling. His mother, Rita Parisi. His brother had taken a pilgrimage to their the home village in Sicily where the family is from. It's an unusual last name. I actually had a detective ask me if your mom was related to an ex-partner of his from the police academy.
Yeah, it's not a big Sicilian name. It's limited to certain regions, apparently, of Sicily.
Yeah, so, but producer Mark's like, oh, yeah, I'm a gypsy. And My father's family is a big mix of people from, what'd you say, Oklahoma,
yeah. West Virginia. But my grandmother is from Oklahoma, and I've got to get the DNA test done.
I would love for you
because
to.
I'm sure I'm a complete mongrel on my dad's side
You're
of the family.
a Mongol. I love it. You're a Viking and a Visigoth and Mongolian. I just make up shit, but it makes me, at least I have hope that my husband is much more interesting than 87% old whitey white face over here. Yeah, what are you going to do? So Curtis Rogers didn't want everyone who had used GEDmatch to feel that, that their information was being compromised. So you had to, opt in, which I understood. Now, most of you who follow true crime probably know of Cece Moore. She is very popular as far as she's kind of a leading specialist in DNA and genetic genealogy, and she's done a lot of work. She had a TV show on one of the major networks. I don't know if it's still going or not. She is much more interesting than the show ever was. What she does, her work is so fascinating, and she is interesting, but the show was just, I don't know, badly put together or something. I didn't really get it. But she, depends on GEDmatch for a lot of what she does. And she, enters a suspect's DNA profile, reviews the results, and then she assesses for law enforcement the likelihood of them being able to, figure out a suspect's identity. So she gives them each a number from 1 to 5. 1 is like, this is a sure thing, you're going to be able to find this person. To 5, it's a long shot. And she said, I've been giving out a lot more 5s than I used to. And that, is troubling. And she, gave a talk at a big convention in Palm Springs, saying, please consider opting in if you have your DNA in any of the websites, in the interest in public safety. Would you not want these people to be caught? Which is exactly what Colleen Fitzpatrick, who's another genetic genealogist, she's, one of the co-founders of the DNA Doe Project. She, they help, that organization helps identify unknown bodies, Jane Doe's. And then she also organized Identifinders. So she helps find suspects in older crimes. And she says, police really want to do their job. They're not after you. They just want to make you safe. Now, I know producer Mark probably, finds some issues with that.
Well, no, we've talked about this before. I think what they're doing, what GEDmatch now, I guess 23andMe are doing is encouraging people to opt in. I think that's good. I think that they should, and I think people should morally. I think it's a good idea, but I don't like the idea of going and putting your DNA into a site because you want to do family research, and then somebody just deciding that law enforcement can go in there and take that information without your permission. So that's all. But I think the way it's working now, I think more people are going to opt in than not.
That's pretty much what the research shows, is that for violent crimes, 91% of people that have their DNA in any sort of database believe that it should be able to be used freely by law enforcement, and 47% feel like it should be used even for nonviolent crimes, which I thought was interesting. So it's like, almost half of the population that have their DNA in a database of one sort or the other feels it should be used for any kind of crime. But I loved the fact that 91% of people, that were asked who have their information in any sort of DNA database, feel that it should be used. And that's something, it's like, in the interest of public safety, don't you want to make it easy for shitty people to be caught? And I have to say that one of the cases that is so interesting that they use as, sort of an example is this story of Angie Dodge. So in 1996, this 18-year-old girl, Angie Dodge, it was like the first or second night in her new apartment in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and she was raped and murdered. And a young man, Chris Tapp, was arrested, and his DNA did not match the semen left on Angie Dodge's body, but he was still convicted of raping and killing her and sentenced to life in prison. And Angie Dodge's mom, over the years, began to believe Christopher Tapp didn't kill my daughter. So she kept pressing authorities to reopen the case. And you might remember this, producer Mark, because we've watched so many shows about Angie Dodge's case. And Carol, her mom, Carol Dodge. Do you remember she was hot on the trail of DNA, and there's this young man named Michael Michael Ursery, who was a filmmaker in like Missouri.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, he had been in Idaho Falls for a short period of time, and she had found genetically, through genealogy, that a family member of Michael Ursery's had committed the crime.
Yep. Very strange.
It was really weird. And she and Michael Ursery, Carol Dodge and Michael Ursery became friends. Cece Moore becomes, gets on the case, but she's like, you know what? I don't know that I'm going to be able, it was so, 15th cousin twice removed. She's like, I don't think we're going to be able to solve this. Well, she then joins Parabon Nanolabs, and she, runs it through the genetic genealogy services that they offer. And she comes up with a DNA profile in GEDmatch in May of 2018. And in 2017, Christopher Tapp had already been freed in a deal with the Idaho Falls prosecutors, of that conviction, but he was not exonerated for aiding and abetting a murder. That still was on his, I don't know why, but it was like he didn't do it, but somehow he aided and abetted. And it was really terrible when you saw that in the interview, he was basically told, if you just admit it to us, you can go home. If anyone ever says that to you, that's a lie.
Yeah,
so
really.
Christopher Tapp spent a very long time, like almost 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, but he's out. He is friends with Angie's mother, Carol Dodge. She's one of the people that worked hard to get the case reopened and to get him exonerated with DNA. So it turns out that this man, I think his name is Brian Drips, his DNA through several cousins in a different part of the world, kind of Brian Lee Drips, here we go. He had discarded a cigarette butt at work, and they had picked that up, and of all the people they tested in the other branches of his family, they figured out that it's him, and they pick him up in May of 2019, and he confesses. So 23 years later, he is arrested for the rape and murder of Angie Dodge. He was staying across the street from her new apartment. I mean, he had never committed another crime. Those are the things that bother me about CODIS. If you are not a repeat offender, if you, do one horrible thing that is really horrible and then decide to spend the rest of your life doing nothing, it doesn't add up to profilers, but it happens. It unfortunately happens. And cases like that would never be solved if it weren't for things like DNA databases and people like Cece Moore and people like Carol Dodge, who just continue to fight for their daughter's case. She wanted the right person to pay for it. She didn't want Christopher Tapp, who basically was, pressured into confessing to something he never did. So here's Cece Moore, presenting at a huge conference in Palm Springs of genetic researchers, investigators, prosecutors, lab techs. And she said, look, if I didn't have access to GEDmatch at the time, I would never have been able to help solve Angie Dodge's case. And that, makes me want to cry a little bit, because the fact that something like that would have just gone on, whether Christopher Tapp was released or not, they would never have known, who did it. It is heartbreaking. And Cece Moore said, I understand why GEDmatch, decided to do what they did for privacy reasons, but there's a whole lot of violent criminals that are allowed to remain free a lot longer because we don't have the full power of genetic genealogy at our, fingertips to use. So she, in her, symposium says, please take a DNA test. Please upload your profile to GEDmatch. Please opt in to let law enforcement use your DNA. We really don't want this valuable tool to slip out of our hands. And I get it. People were using genetic genealogy databases for reasons that were not like this. They were using it to find families, to find connections. I understand. The director for the Center of Medical Ethics and Health Policy at Baylor University, Amy McGuire, said there's a genuine tension between wanting to protect consumers and be respectful of their wishes and recognizing that working with law enforcement is a special benefit. Yeah, it's a special benefit, lady. It's, it's a thing that can help solve. I mean, you don't want to talk about the Golden State Killer all the time, but that's a pretty big one, 13 murders, over 50 rapes, 125 other offenses. That's kind of a big deal. And we know we got him at the end of his life. And honestly, my least favorite, prosecutor in the universe, Anne Marie Schubert of the DA of Sacramento County, said one thing that I agree with. And she said, you only need to look at the pace of press releases since the time of the Golden State Killer and see that virtually every week the pace of those cases being solved is, multiplying. And she's right. It's such a double-edged sword. I just can't help but feel the side that uses it for law enforcement is a good side of the sword. And I understand that people are worried that this information is going to get out to healthcare providers and maybe they would be denied insurance. And, Curtis Rogers of GEDmatch said, we're here for genealogists and not for law enforcement. On the other hand, law enforcement is here to stay. I feel a big obligation to make sure it's used properly. I don't want some half-cocked law enforcement person to do something that creates a story and ruins everything for everyone. Now, I don't exactly know what he means by that, but he said, he did send emails to all of the members urging them to allow law enforcement to search their profiles. The thing is, I think it's 1.4 million members now in GEDmatch, which is a small database, by the way, but vitally important. Only 181,000 members have opted in. So, I know that it really is a double-edged sword. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, Curtis Rogers is like, I'm sorry we had to do this, but I feel very strongly that when we bit the bullet and did what we did, we set the whole future on a much stronger base. 2 or 3 years from now, this whole thing will be forgotten. And that was October of 2019. No, it's not, Mr. Rogers. No, it's not. I don't think it's going to be forgotten for a long time. So GEDmatch was purchased by Verogen Labs. And since then, it's up to 1.4 million profiles. And I guess another 100,000 have opted in. So now it's up to 280,000 as opposed to 180,000. And the new chief executive of Verogen/GEDmatch, Brett Williams, said, that you have a right to privacy and you also have a right to not be murdered and raped. That, to me, is the bottom line. You don't have the right to not be murdered and raped. What you hopefully have is the right to have law enforcement find out who did this to you. You should have the right to not be murdered and raped, but that's not the way the world works. What would be great is if law enforcement had the opportunity to find, God forbid, if that happens to you, the person who did it. If law enforcement has the opportunity to find who did this, I know, again, producer Mark and I have had these discussions and he pretty much succinctly says there's no expectation of privacy any longer. And I feel like that's in the digital world. There are cameras everywhere, and I'm like, I don't give a shit. I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't care.
Well, that's
right.
What are you afraid of if you've done nothing wrong? Well, that's what tyrants have used for years to go in and take away people's rights.
Right.
You got to be careful.
I understand. I guess I'm trying not to be. I'm a very black and white person, and I'm trying to understand the gray. And I know there's a lot of the gray, or more importantly, the brown or other colors, because people feel it could also be very racially motivated. That, if you find a DNA profile and you feel like the person's, ethnicity, that you're going to be leaning more toward someone is a criminal. And I don't know that that's really true, but I know Elliot Rogers did say, I think the future of genetic techniques and forensics is a good thing. And I think that in time, and hopefully not very long from now, people will accept law enforcement's use of genetic genealogy and not be afraid. And I hope that too. I really hope that too.
Well, it does do good. I mean, you mentioned at the start of the podcast that you have a good story to tell about Mr. Middleman and what he's done. And I mean, there are so many good stories coming out now about it. And I think the more good stories people hear, the more they're going to be encouraged to not be reticent to give up their information or to let their DNA be used.
I hope you're right too. So thank you for that wonderful entree into the story, producer Mark. Like the psychic that you are, you knew exactly when I was getting to the story. So I actually had a discussion with Dr. David Middleman this morning on Facebook Messenger. They had released this story, which was so perfect for this episode. And it's a beautiful story. And they were part of it. They were a big part of it. And he's always so humble. He, is all very kumbaya, and it's all about, the partnerships and working together and collaboration. But this was released, as a press release from the Sheriff's Department. One morning in December of 1982, a truck driver notified the Jackson County Sheriff's Department of a possible sighting of a body in the Escatawpa River off of Interstate 10 near Moss Point, Mississippi. The responding deputies recovered the remains of a female toddler that was caught in the brush downriver from where the sighting had been reported. So she had floated downriver. The Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office determined that the child had died just a few hours earlier, but the case went cold as investigators were unable to identify the child or even locate her family. Over the decades that followed, investigators worked all the leads to try and determine the child's identity and gave her the name of Delta Dawn. Since 2002, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children have been assisting the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. They applied their case management team. They applied analytical and forensic resources to help advance the investigation. In 2014, a NCMEC forensic artist created a facial reconstruction of what the child may have looked like and distributed the image across social media in hopes that someone would recognize her. In 2019, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department brought Delta Dawn's remains to Othram, Inc. in hopes that this new genetic testing lab would generate leads to help identify her. Othram's forensic scientist applied proprietary enrichment methods and forensic-grade genome sequencing to produce a genetic profile suitable for genealogical research, and that led to new investigative leads. In a collaborative effort with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and the FBI, a candidate family member was identified and confirmed through additional DNA testing at Othram. After 38 years, Delta Dawn's name was restored to Alicia Ann Heinrich, the daughter of Gwendolyn Clemens, both of whom vanished in 1982. Othram wishes to express gratitude to Catherine Serbasek, who generously funded the project. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department continues to investigate Alicia's death and the disappearance of her mother. Anyone with information that could assist either investigation should contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Department at 228-769-3063. And another piece of information I found is that Alicia and her mother, Gwen, had left one morning in December of 1982 with a man saying they were going to start life over in Florida. They were supposed to be on their way to Florida, and they have no idea if Gwendolyn Clemens is still alive. Her body's never been found. But we know Alicia was found all those years ago, right after something terrible happened to her.
Do we know the name of the man that the mother left with?
They're not releasing that.
Oh.
Exactly. If you have your DNA in any of the public databases available, also consider going to DNAsolves.com, which is part of Othram Inc., and you can really learn how you can make a difference in helping to solve a cold case. So I want to end with this quote from the Agatha Christie book, The ABC Murders, and you can just hear this coming out of Detective Hercule Poirot's mouth. Crime is terribly revealing. Try and vary your methods as you will, your tastes, your habits, your attitude of mind, and your soul is revealed by your actions. And your DNA will catch you. And more cowbell.
Don't forget you can reach us at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. And if you'd like to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/JustTheTipsters.